Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
The story.
It started off, my labour was really long, but then about 24 hours after I had delivered my baby girl, she went blue and she stopped breathing. Thankfully, the paediatrician was in the room at the time and we took her straight to the special care nursery, and she needed extra intervention and she needed lines and things. And that for me was the start that birthed my anxiety.
G'day, I'm Jimmy Colefax. Welcome to The Story. Well, Mer-Rett Abraham was born in Egypt and migrated to Australia when she was 1 year old and has lived here ever since. After embarking on a career as a medical doctor in Sydney, she found herself in the trenches of motherhood and struggling with anxiety and depression. It was in the depths of her despair that she called out to God, and she's written about her experiences in a book called Mama, I See You, Finding Glimmers of Hope in the Trenches of Motherhood. Today, Dr Mirette Abraham joins us from her home in Sydney to share her journey. She's chatting with Eric Scatterbo.
Mirette Abraham, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me, Eric.
Glad to have you on the program. And we should say how ironic it is that we were trying to schedule this interview a few times, but it kept on getting interrupted by motherhood. Is that right?
By motherhood, that's right. You plan, and no matter how much you plan, the plans can never come to fruition if it's not meant to be. But yeah, my daughter was actually quite ill, and she was struggling with fevers and congestion, and it was kind of just touch and go there whether we were going to take her to the hospital. So lots of delays, and obviously the sleeplessness that comes after a sickness bout. So yes, I'm glad to finally be here chatting with you. But yes, motherhood did get in the way.
But that's reality. That's real life. You have interruptions. Yeah. That's part of being a parent.
That's right. And I think it's taken me a long time to just accept that these interruptions are very organic to motherhood, very organic to parenthood. Mm-hmm. It's just life, and things sometimes don't go to plan, and that's okay. And there are just some things that take priority at certain, given moments. So I'm glad you were very understanding. But yes, that is life. That is motherhood. That is my motherhood, I feel, every single plan.
Now, when you said that your daughter was sick, I'm like, oh, obviously we can't do the interview. You have to take her to the doctor. But I'm thinking, oh, wait a second. You are a doctor.
I am a doctor.
But you still went to the doctor.
Yes, because, doctors make the worst patients, and doctors with kids also make the worst doctors for their kids. There's no objectivity. Yes, there's no objectivity. It's all just chaos and anxiety in our minds, and always worst case scenario. And I need to, her GP is really great, and he's always really good at reeling me in, and he'll examine her, and on the side always be like, Mirette, this is fine. You're fine. It's okay. She'll survive. And he's just okay with answering all of my dumb questions. So I'm really glad.
How could you possibly have dumb questions?
Oh, you would be surprised. Lots of really dumb questions. Again, we see the very worst case scenarios.
Oh,
and I worked
right?
in the emergency department for a really long time.
Oh.
And after working for a year in the emergency department, I came home and I put an end to so many toys and so many things that my daughter had, because I just saw the negatives of how that can play out. And so it just made me even more highly strung, which I didn't think was possible, but it did. It did make me even worse.
Wow. Well, I am looking forward to hearing your story because, well, you've been on quite a journey, the depths of despair, as we heard in the introduction, but it is a journey with hope and how the Lord has come in and lifted you out of that despair. So a lot of encouragement at the end of the day. So we want to hear this whole journey. But first, before we get to all that, I want to hear about your background. I believe you are the first Egyptian Coptic Christian that we've ever had on the program. So please tell us about your background.
Well, it's an absolute honor to be invited here. And yeah, so I was born in Egypt. My parents migrated when I had just shy of my second birthday, so I was still one. And they came to Australia, made the difficult decision to move to a country where they knew nobody. They didn't know the language very well. They had really good jobs back in Egypt. They were doing really well financially, and it was really just to give us, their kids better opportunities down the track. And they knew that we would have a harder time if we had stayed in Egypt and wanted to pursue further studies or, specific careers. So as soon as I turned one, they made the brave decision to come to Australia. And so they migrated here. Again, I turned 2 when we got here. And I've been living in Sydney my whole life. We've moved around Sydney, but we really haven't moved anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And we've built up our own community and our own, network of friends through the church. The church really was our home.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how big is the Egyptian Coptic Christian community in Sydney? I would have no idea.
We've got, just over 20 churches in Sydney alone, just Coptic Orthodox churches around Sydney. And so all around Sydney. So whether you go east, south, northwest, wherever, you'll find a Coptic church somewhere in the vicinity. So we're quite a decent sized population. We're a smaller population in Egypt, but we're still, quite known. The Copts are quite known around the world.
What percentage of the population in Egypt is Coptic Christian?
Look, I'd say last I checked, which was last year, we were about 5 to 10%, so quite small.
Mm-hmm.
But we are growing and we're establishing churches all around the world, and we've got mission groups all around the world as well. And so it is, Coptic is our heritage. It's our culture. We had started speaking Coptic in Egypt back to distinguish ourselves as the Christians when the Arabs invaded. So it was more to identify ourselves as Christians, as the Coptic Christians of the land. And so we started speaking Coptic, and Coptic just infiltrated all of our services. It was the native tongue for us at that point. And Coptic Christians have been persecuted since the beginning of time. So I think it was an honor to be martyred for the name of Christ. And so to have this mark of a language, and, a lot of us have crosses on our wrists as a mark of our Christianity. And to have that mark and people identify us as Coptic Christians was quite a privilege. And so that, over time, we still speak Coptic in a lot of our services. We use it in our liturgies, a lot of our responses. It's no longer the native tongue. In Egypt, we speak Arabic to each other, and around the world, you just speak the language, of the country you live in. But we do still incorporate it into our services. Orthodoxy is really just, Orthodox means straight and narrow. So we've kind of just taken the apostolic faith. So the Apostle Mark came and preached Christianity to Egypt, and we've taken that with very little, if no, diversions throughout the course of history, and we still practice that same faith. And that's we're bringing that ancient faith into the modern world. So we still have English in our services, obviously, to make it more inclusive, and we have certain parishes that are set up just for mission and just for evangelism. And so those parishes don't actually incorporate Coptic in their services to make it a lot more inclusive and make it a lot more open to anyone wanting, to join the faith.
So who would they be evangelizing to in these services?
So anyone and everyone open.
Okay, so it's not just for Egyptians or
no, it's for everybody.
Subculture.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's for everybody of any background, any culture, anyone that just wants to be introduced to the faith, anyone that just wants a place to belong. It's really just for everyone. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you so much. I didn't know a whole lot about Coptic Christians, so this is very educational for me. So now let's go from the broad to the specific. What did it mean for you growing up, and how did your faith, your own personal faith, how did that develop?
So growing up for me, I had always attended the church. I grew up in the church, and my relationship with God, I feel, was always a very checklist relationship. Have I prayed? Have I read my Bible? Have I done my quiet time? Have I preached at all? Have I done anything extra for him? Have I served? It was always, looking back, it was always a checklist. And I did start to develop a really close relationship with him towards the end of my schooling. And I felt really out of my depth. I know it sounds a bit juvenile, but I really did dedicate a lot of myself to my studies. And I felt like I really needed him to get through. I really needed him to help me de-stress and to just focus and to show me where I was supposed to be and what I was supposed to be. I was quite confused as to where he was leading me. And so I developed a really close relationship with him through, that period. And that period of not knowing what I wanted to do with my life, although I may have seemed young, I was only in high school, I feel like he spoke to me through a lot of the people around me as well, which he still does till today. And that's my love language. That's how he shows up for me. And so I grew up around a lot of cancer patients, not patients, but family members. I had lost so many family members to cancer. And cancer for me was just something that was always around. It just never seemed to leave. And no one ever got better. And to see their faith and to see their will and their strength to the very end was beyond inspiring. It was something that I wanted and I needed in my life. Regardless of the trial in front of me, I needed that willpower, that faith to know that whatever it was, God is there at the end just waiting with open arms. I needed to have that zeal for him. And for me, I interpreted that as possibly if I worked with cancer patients or people who are terminally ill, I can be reminded of that daily. I can be reminded that death is so near, that we are so fragile and we need him more than ever. And so that kind of started the journey for me, set me on that path with God. I got to know him a little more intimately, and the way he communicated with me, I started to notice the little love notes he was leaving around for me. And that's when my true faith journey started, I'd say. Although I did grow up in the church, my true journey with Christ, my true love for him, I would say started in late high school.
You're listening to The Story. Today, Eric Scatterbo is chatting with Dr Mirette Abraham, who's sharing her life journey and what it was like growing up in the Egyptian Coptic Christian community in Sydney. Next, we'll hear more of her story, including how her battle with anxiety and depression began. That's all coming up when we return.
If this program has highlighted something you'd like prayer for, we'd love to pray for you. Call 1-800-PRAY-FOR-ME. That's 1-800-772-936. It's a free call. Or text 0401 132 888.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Colefax and this is The Story. Today, Dr Mirette Abraham from Sydney is sharing her life journey with us. She's the author of the book, Mama, I See You, Finding Glimmers of Hope in the Trenches of Motherhood. Before the break, we heard how God had been working in her life and how she was inspired by the faith of family members who had cancer. Now, here's more of her conversation with Eric Scatterbo.
And did that experience with family members with cancer, did that kind of have an impact on your decision to become a doctor, or is that something completely different?
That's exactly right. That's the only reason I got into medicine. And the only reason I pushed so hard was, I wanted to feel, as morbid as this sounds, just bear with me, I wanted to feel as close to suffering as possible.
Oh, really?
In the way that I know everybody kind of avoids cancer and avoids the terminally ill and avoids sick kids. But I feel like being near suffering is a constant reminder for me of how fragile I really am, of how fragile this life really is, and how much I need God, how much I need to rely on him. And it, seeing other people suffer as painful as that is, I've had times in my work and during my days where I have just broken down. I've struggled to cope with losses. I've struggled to cope with diagnoses. I still do. But I know that, there is hope for them outside of this realm. We always look to the physical, but we are living for an eternal life, right? So our lens needs to be eternal, and suffering is just a way for me as a constant reminder that my eternal game needs to be strong.
Yeah.
I need to be focused.
Yes, having an eternal perspective. But I'm just finding this very interesting because so many people would react the opposite way. Oh, cancer, dying. I don't want to have anything to do with that. Let me go the opposite way. But it actually attracted you to strengthen your faith and then also to get into medicine and have a constant reminder of your faith.
Yeah, and look, I've seen miracles and such healing happen towards the end of people's lives. And although, yes, a lot of people do run away from it, I feel like when I get too comfortable and too cushy in my job, it pulls me away from my faith. It pulls me away from God. It makes me complain more. It makes me bitter. It makes me resentful. But working with those who really need help, who are really in pain, who are truly suffering, who feel like everybody's left them, who towards the end, a lot of family members are no longer there and it's just them. It's made me rely on God a lot more, because the power of my service in medicine, the power of my service as a doctor becomes much more kind of weighted. You know, what I do has more weight in those times than when everything is actually fine for them. And, you know, I may not be preaching God in the corridors of the wards or on the, you know, in the hospital beds, but as soon as somebody asks, or, you know, I've seen people come close to dying and say, I've always wondered if there's a God. What a door, what an opportunity to talk. And you don't get those opportunities unless you're really hit with death. You know, you're facing death, and you're facing that with such fear, and you've got anxiety towards it. You'd never get those opportunities to have these discussions with people. And look, they're very few and far between, but my gosh, when they happen, it's just such sweetness, and it's such sweetness on God's part to allow me to be a part of that, to feel like I'm a part of that person's journey.
So it's interesting that you had all these experiences with people close to death, but little did you know that eventually you would be going through your depths of despair and valleys of life experiences. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I feel, you know, up until a certain point, I was taking, to an extent, suffering for granted. You know, I was watching other people suffer, and I was, you know, feeling pity for them, and, you know, trying to pray for them and trying to serve them as best as I could in my workplace, and whoever came up, you know, I came across outside my workplace too. But I felt like there was a bit of a disconnect, and there was still an image of God that I had painted, and that's what I was living, thinking that I knew. You know, I thought I had my relationship with God down pat, you know, my experiences growing up, and I felt like him and I were tight, and I knew him and he knows me, and we're okay. But, you know, I soon realized where I am right now is definitely, I'm not where I was before. And the God I know now is so much more awesome than the one I thought I knew before. And so, like anything in medicine, I had a plan. I wanted to get into cancer care. I wanted to work with people who are terminally ill. But if anyone is listening and is a doctor, you'll know that that road is never that smooth. And it's always much harder to get to where you want to be once you're in the hospital system. And there are still a lot of politics. And, you know, if someone says they like you and they want to give you a job, you kind of jump on that because you know you're not guaranteed jobs elsewhere, and it kind of gets tricky that way. And so I had made the decision to stop pursuing cancer care and actually go into a different route, because, you know, a specialist had told me that, you know, I did enjoy working with geriatrics, so the old people. I really did I loved working in aged care.
But once again, you're with people dying.
Once again, yeah, and I twisted it. I always said, you know, if I do end up in aged care, I'll only work, you know, with the terminally ill in aged care. So kind of,
you just can't get away from death.
I can't get away. I thought that was where I needed to be. I really did.
Interesting.
And so I just kept trying to make concession that way. And then I got to a point, it was kind of a fork in the road, where I had committed to a training program, which included really long hours, really long weekends, the training program would have been grueling. My hours would have been insane. I would have not had time or a chance to even start a family if I wanted to. There was no part-time option, and I couldn't kind of share the job with someone else who was a young mom or someone who just wanted some time. So I really had made the commitment to commit to this program for 5 extra years. And so a part of me was kind of quite upset by that decision, but I never really verbalized it because I really did want to start my own family. I really did want to be a mum. And so I had prayed about it and I struggled with it. And I got to a point, really, it was an overnight switch where I said, I'm going to pull out of this program and I'm going to start a family. And I spoke to my husband and, we were on the same page. And it's fine, as a doctor, there are different avenues. It may take a bit longer to get to where you want. You may have to change completely. You just have to kind of roll with the punches. And so I thought that was it for my dream of being a cancer doctor. So I pulled out and, we fell pregnant, thank God, quite easily. But that journey in itself, that 9-month preparation for motherhood, I would say wasn't really preparation. I was really oblivious to what was coming. And so I thought my entire life I was consumed by my job. I was consumed by what I was meant to do, where I was meant to be, how I'm going to get there, how hard I need to work to get there. And so pulling out was, as hard as that was for me, and making the decision to start a family, I really didn't know struggle until I became a mom. And the work struggles are nothing compared to.
Most people would think becoming a doctor would be a bit of a struggle. I know it would be for me, and one I wouldn't be successful in. But you're saying that really wasn't as much of a struggle for you. Motherhood was a bigger struggle.
For sure. And obviously, being young and getting into medicine young, and I only ever had to think about myself, me, where am I going? What am I doing? I really want to get into this training program. I want to work with these people. This is what I want. And yes, I think that's where God wants me, but this I need to pursue this for myself. And it was a very kind of selfish ambition. Motherhood is the complete opposite of that. It is the most selfless thing. You give up your entire life, your entire body, your being, your sleep, your mind, your soul, everything is given up for this person that you haven't even met yet. And
I'm
you're
wondering,
already giving up.
Was part of the struggle that you had a vision of what motherhood was going to be like, and then that kind of came crashing down? Is that part of the struggle?
For sure. And, the opening chapter in my book, I've called it Instagrammable, because I feel like what I've been fed about motherhood up until that point was very much, the idealistic view of motherhood. You go on a long maternity leave, you get time with your baby, they laugh and they giggle and you learn how to sleep, and it's just a loving time, and you teach them how to eat, and it's messy, yes, but it's so, joyful. And I was fixated on that view, and I felt like I was going to have a great time. I'm going to love being a mum. You just play with your baby all day. You go on really cute shopping trips and get to dress up looking the same. And that's the view I was almost consumed by in my pregnancy. And so my pregnancy was quite uneventful. And I felt like I really had it in the bag. I'm also a doctor, and I did all my...
Yeah, should be no problem.
Yeah, there should be no problem. I did all my resuscitation courses, and I did extra stuff just to be a bit more prepared.
And you've been looking at pictures of other babies on Instagram, so you know exactly how it's going to be.
I know exactly how it's going to be. Exactly. I knew the outfits I was going to wear to the hospital, and it was just one of those, you're kind of fed one thing. But I really had no idea what I was in for. And then I got thrown into motherhood. So it started off, my labor was really long, didn't really think much of it. But, I just thought that's just how labor is. This is supposed to be difficult. A baby's entry into the world is not going to be easy. But then about 24 hours after I had delivered my baby girl, she went blue and she stopped breathing.
Oh, wow.
And that image, just seeing her that way just sent a bolt down my spine. I didn't know what to do, how to react. And there was no struggle. So it was silent. She went blue. She didn't struggle with the choking, with the phlegm that was getting obstructed. Yeah, she didn't struggle.
Yeah.
And so thankfully the pediatrician was in the room at the time, and we took her straight to the special care nursery, and she needed extra intervention and she needed lines and things. And that for me was the start that birthed my anxiety, I feel.
Well, that's part one of Eric Scadabow's chat with Dr Mirette Abraham. Today, we've heard the start of her story and how her battle with anxiety and depression began soon after she became a mother. Next time, we'll hear how God begins to rescue her from the depths of despair. Meanwhile, to learn more about Dr Mirette Abraham and her journey to a more intimate relationship with God, you can read her book, Mama, I See You, Finding Glimmers of Hope in the Trenches of Motherhood. Her website is mamamd.blog. Once again, that's mama, mamamd.blog. Finally, before we end today, I want to leave you with a Bible verse. Maybe you're listening today and can relate to Dr. Abraham's battle with anxiety. A comforting verse to remember is 1 Peter 5, verse 7, which says, "Cast all your anxieties or cares on the Lord, because he cares for you." That's right. One of the many insights Mer-Rett has learned is that we are not alone. God is right there with us and wants to help us. Why not ask the Lord for help today? Well, until next time, when we'll hear part 2 of Dr. Mirette Abraham's story, I'm Jimmy Colefax, encouraging you to share your story with someone today.
Next time on The Story.
You've got a newborn, you're not sleeping, you're anxious over everything. I'm in and out of hospital, so I'm separated from her a lot. I'm in pain constantly, and the pain is just not going away. And I remember those first 3 months, my one prayer, before God was always, just take this pain away. Just take the pain away so I can focus, so that I can enjoy my baby.
When Dr. Mirette Abraham became a mother, she thought it would be the beginning of much joy and ecstasy in her life. Instead, she was surprised to find out it was the beginning of her battle with anxiety and depression. She's written about her experiences in her book, Mama, I See You, Finding Glimmers of Hope in the Trenches of Motherhood. We'll hear how God works in Dr. Abraham's life next time.
The Story. Just another way Vision is helping you look to God daily.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.